Good morning, everyone. This is something my least favorite thing to stand in front of podium and talk about the research. I like to be behind curtain and do all the brainstorming. Anyway, thank you, Aaron, for the introduction. I'll introduce myself, and thank you, Aaron, for introducing this particular session. My name is Kunwar Singh, and I'm Senior Geospatial Scientist at AidData, and also an affiliate faculty at the Center for Geospatial Analysis at William & Mary. And again, it's a pleasure to be here and to see so many people, so many faces, and in person specifically. Before I jump into our geospatial impact evaluation work in Niger, I would like to take a step back and provide you some context about why this work matters. Agriculture in Niger depends almost entirely on rainfall. The challenge is not just how much rain falls, but when and how it falls. Farmers often face short rainy seasons, long dry spells, and occasionally heavy rains. When heavy rains do happen, much of the water is lost as a runoff before it can infiltrate into the soil. This is especially true in degraded landscape where vegetation cover is sparse and soils are prone to erosion. At the same time, climate variability and land degradation are putting increasingly pressure on agriculture system. Irrigation is rarely an option, a practical option, because water resources and irrigation infrastructures are limited. As a result, improving how rainfall is captured, is stored, and utilized has become a critical strategy for strengthening both food security and climate resilience. This is where rainwater harvesting interventions such as Demi-lunes have emerged as a simple, cost-effective approach for restoring degraded land and improving agricultural productivity. Now let us look at the landscape from above. These fish-scale patterns visible in this remotely sensed satellite imagery are not natural phenomena of formation. These are Demi-lunes. Each one represents people physically reshaping the landscape. Demi-lunes are semicircular in shape, typically 3 to 5 meters wide, dug into the ground, oriented against the natural slope. During rainfall event, they capture runoff and slow water movement. Often, organic material is added to improve soil quality. Individually, they appear simple, almost unremarkable, but collectively, they function like small landscape sponges designed to hold water where it is needed the most. Researchers and developmental organizations have long viewed Demi-lunes as a promising interventions. Previous studies suggest that Demi-lunes can help improve water retention, reduce soil erosion, help increase vegetation cover, all in all, help increase agricultural productivity. Government and donors have invested billions of dollars in rainwater harvesting program throughout the drylands of Africa over the last 3 decades. Despite these investments, a basic question remain unanswered. For example, can we rigorously quantify their long-term impact across landscape? 2 important studies provided critical insight. The first one is this review study that examined rainwater harvesting program across multiple contexts throughout the drylands of Africa. We worked on this for over 2 years, and recently we published in Agricultural Water Management. The findings suggest that infrastructure alone does not guarantee success. Long-term outcomes depend heavily on local participation, maintenance system, long tenure arrangement, and institutional support. The second study, led by Jenny Aker and Kelsey Jack, examined why farmers adopt Demi-lunes. Through a randomized controlled trial, they tested different barriers to adoption. one finding stood out. Training generated long-lasting impact, even more than cash transfers over time. Initially, support helped, but by the end of 3 years, adoption rate converged. In simple terms, knowledge and training turned out to be more persistent driver than money alone. Together, these studies explained why farmers adopt Demi-lunes and how interventions influence behavior. However, an important question remained. What happens to landscape over time? Do vegetation and soil moisture improve? Do benefit persist year after implementation? And can we observe adoption and impact beyond experimental areas? This is where Earth observation can build on RCT, or randomized controlled trial findings. We conducted GI work in Jinder region of southern Niger. Agriculture supports more than 80% of the population and depends almost entirely on rainfall. Soils are sandy, highly susceptible to erosion. Rainfall averages approximately 400 to 550 millimeter annually, but varies substantially from year to year. Droughts are frequent. These conditions, rainfall variability, erosion-prone soil, and limited irrigation have led to widespread promotion of Demi-lunes to capture runoff and enhance soil moisture. The entire process was carried out in multiple steps. The first step was the identification of intervention areas, followed by detection and digitization of Demi-lunes. Using multi-temporal high-resolution satellite imagery in Google Earth Pro, we systematically identified intervention areas and then also detected Demi-lunes and digitized them. We use visual interpretation technique and elements, for example, shape, texture, and spatial arrangement to detect them. We digitized each structure in ArcGIS Pro and marked its earliest appearance, which allowed us to estimate construction timing. To validate the effectiveness of our approach, an independent expert visually validated 3 random samples of 1,000 points with a mean overall accuracy of more than 98%, with errors primarily due to poor quality of image. After excluding ambiguous cases, erroneous digitized point, we mapped more than 180,000 Demi-lunes in the area. While we were working on visual interpretation techniques to digitize these Demi-lunes, we also developed and applied a deep learning approach to automatically detect and map Demi-lunes using SkySat imagery with 50 centimeter resolution. To support model development, we created and annotated more than 30,000 image patches, which were used to train semi-supervised UNet model. We also evaluated model sensitivity to training sample size by incrementally increasing the proportion of training data in 10% intervals. As expected, model performance improved with larger training data set, but it plateaued afterwards. Overall, highlighting the importance of sufficient training samples for higher overall accuracies. The next challenge I stepped in our study was linking intervention areas to remotely sensed satellite imagery. The study area was overlaid by with a continuous 30 by 30 grid to integrate Landsat imagery to match their spatial resolution, which is 30 meter. Grids containing more than or equal to 22 Demi-lunes were classified as treatment units. That represents a minimum density sufficient to generate detectable vegetation or moisture signal at a pixel scale. Comparison grids were systematically sampled within 600 meters buffer surrounding each treatment cluster to capture ecologically comparable conditions while avoiding spatial autocorrelation and spillover effects. We wanted to basically control areas that experience similar environmental conditions but without intervention exposure. We then used imagery from Landsat archives spanning from 2010 through 2025 to monitor landscape change. We used two indices. The first, normalized difference vegetation index, to measure vegetation greenness and serve as a proxy for photosynthetic activities and biomass production. The second, normalized multi-date drought index to capture moisture condition and drought stress by incorporating shortwave infrared information. Rather than examining annual average alone, we aggregated values from these indices into 3 seasonal windows aligned with agricultural calendar. First, rainy season from January to May, during rains from June to September, and after rains from October to December. This seasonal approach allowed us to capture environmental dynamics that annual average often misses. To identify suitable reference unit for each treatment grids, we implemented nearest neighbor matching in 6-dimensional slope space using a k-dimensional tree algorithm. This method prioritized the reference grid exhibiting the closest pre-intervention temporal trajectory, thereby enforcing the parallel trend assumption essential for robust quasi-experimental inference. And the final step was to estimate impacts. We implemented an event study difference in difference framework using a method developed by Sun and Abraham. This was important because intervention did not occur simultaneously. Demi-lune appeared across different years and locations. Traditional models can produce bias estimate under staggered adoption setting. Instead, this approach compares treated location only with units that had not yet received intervention at each point in time. We also incorporated both grid level and year fixed effects to count for persistent environment characteristic and broader annual shocks, such as drought and favorable rainfall years. We also conducted multiple robustness checks to ensure our approach is effective. First, we tested whether results were driven by single cluster using a leave one cluster out analysis. Second, we examined potential spillover effect. Third, we explored whether impact varied across different environmental conditions. Means we stratified landscape based on initial vegetation cover and terrain slope, or landscape slope, to determine whether Demi-lune performed differently in more degraded areas across different topographic settings. Our first major finding was straightforward but important. Landscape become greener after Demi-lune implementation. Before intervention, treatment and comparison areas followed similar trajectories, providing evidence that they were moving in parallel before implementation. This is important because it strengthens confidence in the causal interpretation of our results. Following the intervention, vegetation gain emerged gradually and strengthened over time. 4 to 5 years after implementation, treatment areas exhibited substantial higher vegetation level compared to their expected counterfactual trajectory. This pattern suggests that the benefit of Demi-lune intervention accumulate over time and may take several years before fully visible. The second major finding involves soil moisture dynamics. We use a normalized multi-band drought index to measure moisture condition and water stress. Lower value indicate improved moisture retention. As with the first finding, in this case, before intervention, treatment areas were actually slightly drier than comparison areas, suggesting they may have been somewhat more degraded at baseline. However, immediately after implementation, we observed a reversal. Moisture condition improved and continued to strengthen over time. Our final finding addressed an important question: are these impacts isolated or broadly applicable? As I mentioned earlier, we conducted multiple robustness checks. Finding remained remarkably stable. The first column is about NDVI. The second column is about NMDI. First row is about spillover within 300 meter and after 300 meter buffer distance. Second row is about mean NDVI, and the third row is about median slope. So we examined heterogeneity across environmental conditions. Interestingly, some of the strongest vegetation response occurred in areas with lower baseline vegetation cover that were initially more degraded. Effects also persisted across different terrain conditions. This suggests demi-lunes are not only effective, but potentially most valuable where restoration needs are greatest. Several broader implications emerges from this work. I will talk the three main ones. First, a small-scale intervention can generate landscape scale impacts. What may appear to be a simple semicircular pit in the ground, when implemented systematically across the landscape, can reshape ecological process and improve resilience. Second, context matters. We found greater gains in more degraded landscape, suggesting that a strategically targeting intervention may increase restoration effectiveness and resource efficiency. The third one, geospatial impact evaluation creates new opportunities for evidence generation. Take-home message: sometimes the most powerful solutions are deceptively simple. Slowing down a drop of rain can restore landscape and build resilience at a scale. Thank you.
All right, we'll have Arnaud and Jessica next. Arnaud, if you want to come on up.
My name is Arnaud. I'm a co-researcher on this project I will be presenting, and my colleague Jessica will present the second part of the research. So our project is about evaluating the impact of an agricultural technique called Farmer-Managed Natural Regeneration on reforestation and other agricultural indicators. So basically, we are doing an RCT, randomized controlled trials, combined with using Earth observation to measure some of the environmental outcome. So at this stage, we have completed the baseline, and are we presenting about the baseline results? Or we haven't started yet the treatment, and we have not completed yet the endline survey. So what's the policy issue here? So globally, there's a general consensus on the value of trees for medicine, biodiversity, carbon absorption, biomass, and there's also an increasing consensus on the need of reforestation and the need to reduce deforestation to help mitigate climate change and build farmer resilience to climate shock. And there's some evidence that show that formalizing farmers' land rights have an effect on deforestation. However, there's no clear evidence showing whether formalizing farmer land right can increase reforestation, especially through a technique called Farmer-Managed Natural Regeneration. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that technique. So basically, Farmer-Managed Natural Regeneration is different than planting tree for reforestation. Here, farmers look for existing tree roots or seed from trees that have been cut in the past and try to protect and grow this trunk, this seed, into new trees. So it's all natural. There's no new plant in the soil. So that technique has been used a lot starting from in Niger, and there are some observational evidence showing that that technique works, but there's no rigorous study that have proved that there are no other factors included in the evidence shown in the use of this technique. So we can see in the image, on the left side you have a deserted land, and on the right side you have farmer-managed natural regeneration that have produced high yield in crops in the right picture. So we would like to note here two things. One of the major barriers to the adoption of farmer-managed natural regeneration is the formalization of land rights. Like, tree is considered as a durable good. And when farmers feel that the land is insecure, they don't have any formal land title, then they have less incentive to invest in growing tree on the land. So we would like to know if that barrier of land right formalization, if that barrier is lifted, will that boost the incentive to grow tree and to adopt farmer-managed natural regeneration technique. And we also would like to know if we like to know the impact of farmer-managed natural regeneration on crop yield, food security, farmers' vulnerability to climate shock, and other environmental outcomes like tree cover, tree density. So we ask ourselves the following research question. First, will farmers adopt a farmer-managed natural regeneration if they are providing a training on its practice? And second, will access to land right certificate boost the adoption of farmer-managed natural regeneration? And third, we would like to see the impact of the practice of farmer-managed natural regeneration on woody vegetation cover, distribution and density, on biomass, carbon absorption, food security, income, and farmers' livelihood vulnerability. So to do this, we started with a census. So the eligibility criteria for that census is first, the person has to be a farmer, and the person has to be a landowner, and third, the person do not have to possess a land right certificate, and fourth, the person should have never practiced farmer-managed natural regeneration. So we census around 3,141 farmers. So this is our sample frame. And from that, then we randomly assign 2,000 of these farmers to our first treatment group, 1,000 to the control group, and within the first treatment group of 2,000 farmers, we assign 100 of them to receive land right certificate, in addition to the treatment on farmer-managed natural regeneration. So this is our objective. But we have some constraints. We have some constraints like we can have spillover effect from the treatment to the control group. In other words, some farmer of the control group may copy the training from farmers who are in the treatment group. So how do we deal with this? So we run some, we did some buffer. So we set a distance of 1,000 meters between observation. So in a treatment group or in a control group, the distance between farmers' plots are less than 1,000 meters. So you can see in the blue line is a treatment one, and in the yellow are the treatment at the control, and the red is the treatment two. So these are the plots. So this is the intra-treatment buffer. Now we also have the inter-treatment buffer that you can see in this picture. So you have the inter-treatment buffer means that between treatment, between farmer in each treatment arms, there should be a distance of at least 1,000 meters, 1 kilometer, so that it is difficult for farmer in the treatment, in the control group to copy what farmer in the treatment group are doing. Otherwise, our result will be biased. So after this buffer constraint setting, then we run our baseline social and economic survey, and we also did a baseline environmental data collection. So I'm presenting here the baseline social and economic survey as well as the environmental data collection at baseline. So we have here the first indicator is the food consumption score. We compare farmers in the treatment group to farmers in the control group. So to run an effective RCT, we have to find for the treatment group farmers a perfect counterfeit of farmer in the control group, meaning that the characteristic, whether social and economic characteristic of farmer in the treatment group have to be similar to the farmer in the control group. And we compare the food consumption score. We realize that they have the same patterns. And we run a balance test between farmers in the treatment versus farmer in the control. We didn't find any large difference between farmer in the control and farmer in the treatment group in regard to food consumption score. And we also realized that 55% of the farmers in our whole sample are below the borderline of food consumption score. Now we compare also the food consumption at the disaggregate level. So between poor in the treatment group and poor in the control group, between borderline farmers in the control and borderline farmers in the treatment, and between acceptable farmers in the control and acceptable farmers in the treatment. And we didn't find any large difference between them. However, in the poor group, we found some moderate difference that we will control for during our data analysis. Then the next indicator was the wealth index. So we realized the same thing, the same pattern in regard to the distribution of the wealth index between farmers in the control and farmers in the treatment, and also compared to the total sample. And we run again balance tests between control and treatment in regard to the wealth index, and we didn't find any moderate or large difference across treatment arms and control. We did the same analysis at the disaggregate level between the poorest, the poorer, the middle, the wealthier, and the wealthiest, between those who are in control and those who are in treatment. And we didn't find any moderate or large difference between farmers in both groups, in the three groups. So. And finally, for the social and economic indicator, we compare the livelihood vulnerability index distribution between the three groups. We found that it also here that they have a similar pattern. And we also compare the component of the livelihood vulnerability index for farmers who are in control, farmers who are in treatment, and we didn't find any large differences between group treatment arm. And then we move to the environmental indicators. First, the woody regeneration specimen distribution is the same. We found the same pattern across treatment and control. We realize that it's a reverse J curve. And we also look at the distribution of tree density per plot across treatment arm and control group. Also the same pattern, a reverse J curve. And we look at the distribution of tree cover per plot. We realize again that they have the same distribution pattern across group. And finally, we run a balance test between the average tree cover per plot, the average tree density per plot, the average woody regeneration specimen density per plot, and the average woody regeneration rate across treatment and control. And we didn't find any large difference between treatment arms and control group, meaning that we can globally say that the control, farmers who are in control are quite similar to farmers who are in the treatment arms. Now we let my colleague Jessica to talk to you about the next.
Thank you, Arnaud, for laying out the foundation for this RCT. And as you can see, this is a slightly different type of use case than you're going to hear a lot about in the later sessions. A lot of the use cases that will be presented are retrospective in nature, right? We're trying to recover and look at what were the impacts of different interventions, and these interventions happened many years ago. This is a very different type of case. What this is helping to highlight is what can we do when we have an ongoing RCT? How can we bring alongside Earth observation data to not take the place of survey data, but to complement and to ask a variety of questions that would be unanswerable, or to confirm questions that might be answerable with survey data. So here we're going to talk a little bit about how we plan to use Earth observation data. As Arnaud was speaking, this RCT is ongoing, right? The baseline data is being collected, both on the socioeconomic indicators as well as the environmental baseline conditions. And interestingly to note here is that on the environmental baseline data that is collected, this is collected at the parcel level, right? We are looking at individual plots that farmers are managing themselves. And so this provides us a rich set of information found within the survey data. We have enumerators that have gone out and are collecting data about the actual number of trees that are on a particular parcel. We're looking at, how much woody vegetation is there? What is the height of these trees? How big are they, right? So we're collecting a rich set of information through this environmental baseline data collection. Now we're at a really critical juncture where we can think very crucially about how can we bring Earth observation data to answer additional questions and confirm what we're finding from the environmental baseline collected. So here in the images that you can see, in red are the parcel boundaries. And overlaid here is just a simple Google Earth Engine, imagery here. And you can see already that we can see that there are maybe some trees, some types of woody vegetation, but we cannot see fully here what is on these parcels, right? And so as we move forward, we will explore how much high resolution imagery is required. This allows us to test some of these questions of, would medium resolution imagery be enough? Or do we need to move to much higher resolution data? And what we would like to do is, because we have already counted the number of trees on a parcel, woody vegetation, we have that information on the parcels already. What we can do now with Earth observation data is to go back through and check, as we are looking at this imagery, is this what we are finding? We will probably have to rely on human observation when reviewing these satellite imagery pieces to help us count and identify these trees. But because we have already collected information on what is on these parcels, we can go back and corroborate these two data sources and look and see how they complement one another. And as we keep doing this, we'll keep looking through the types of satellite imagery that is required at this stage, but this is our ultimate goal. And so as we incorporate satellite imagery, we want to be able to know, can we detect the different types of woody vegetation that are on these parcels? We have it a little bit in the survey data already, but can we do this with the satellite imagery, right? This is providing an actually really great test case of being able to see what can we detect from satellite imagery, and does it match up with what we have in our survey data as well? And so, as we do this, we might also create some vegetation indices and look at how this vegetation is growing over time. And so as Arnaud was saying, we've done the initial set of baseline data collection. Where we will move now into the future is actually administering the treatment. So we need to administer the treatment, which will happen this summer into the fall time period. And then we will be able to start analyzing alongside this data collection what we have in the Earth observation data. A final end-line data collection is planned for the end of 2027, which will also further allow us to see, what do we see in the satellite imagery? How does this line up with what we've collected in the survey data, and provide a foundation to be able to track these changes throughout time. I think something we've talked a lot about today already is the fact that a lot of these projects and interventions have very long tails where we want to be able to measure the impact of the intervention, right? And so in the case of this RCT, budgetary constraints allow us only to collect this type of information, a year and a half after the treatment has been administered. However, by utilizing Earth observation data in this context, we are able to set a foundation where we can go back in several years and analyze if those outcomes are indeed happening, and do we see constant trends, or do they differentiate across time? And so as this RCT is being undertaken, we look to you for some guidance, for questions that help us shape what we do with this Earth observation data and how we align it with survey data. And so thank you for your time, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Jessica and Arnaud. We're going to be moving across the continent now to Somalia, so I'll ask Kamran to come up and get us started there.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you all for joining, both in person and online. My name is Kamran. I'm an economist at the FAO Agri-Food Economics and Policy Division. I'm joined by Ariel, BenYishay, to present our joint work on canal rehabilitation in Somalia and canal rehabilitation and resilience in Somalia. This work is co-authored by with Jacob, Pratap, and Rachel from AidData, and with Rebecca and Anna Paula from FAO, and including ourselves, of course. In this paper, we use remote sensing data and household survey data to analyze the impact of canal rehabilitation and resilience building interventions in Somalia on a range of outcomes, drawing on using Somalia. The aim of the analysis is not just to analyze whether canal rehabilitation worked or did not work in Somalia, but also it's an exploration of remote sensing techniques to see how this technique could be extended to other geographies or in other contexts. Our motivation is twofold. One, the existing evidence on how canal rehabilitation interventions, how they impact irrigation is mixed. We still lack a clear understanding of how these interventions affect key outcomes, including irrigation, agricultural outcomes. And there's also limited evidence on how irrigation interventions perform in conflict-affected settings and in regions where water is scarce. On this slide, we have provided a few peer-reviewed articles, some citations, which emphasize this point I'm making. And why do we use remote sensing data in this project or in other projects? In this context, it allows us to do ex-post impact evaluation, where even when household data are unavailable or incomplete, we can use remote sensing to go back in time and see how this intervention affected the outcomes. Then also in situations where FAO works a lot is protected crisis setting, where we cannot necessarily go in the field and collect household data. It allows us to evaluate interventions in challenging settings where household surveys are infeasible. Third, it provides comparable sites purely on geographical and geospatial basis and irrespective of administrative boundaries or zones which are unachievable or not able to be reached. And we are able to better balance characteristics at baseline using geospatial characteristics. And then also it allows us to go beyond the time bound. We can in theory go back and observation before the project started allows us to capture better the assumption, the common trend assumption better, parallel trend assumption, and even allow us to go well beyond the scope of the project in the future and see whether we were able to continue reaping the benefits in the long term as well when the project had already concluded. So having all these benefits, we employed remote sensing data to evaluate this use case in Somalia on irrigation and its impact. Just a quick background on how irrigation agriculture in Somalia works. So Somalia features a mix of irrigated and rain-fed farming, but only 2.5% of its total agricultural area is classified as arable. Production is concentrated along two rivers, Juba and Shabelle rivers, which are both rainfall dependent. Before 1990, Somalia had large-scale controlled irrigation networks, including barrages, canals, but after 1990, with regime change, the infrastructure deteriorated significantly. Simultaneously, climate fragility has increased, and with increasing frequency of droughts and floods disrupting the two main agricultural seasons, the GU and the Deir season. From 2019, UN implemented irrigation projects designed to strengthen farmer resilience, in collaboration with state authorities. These interventions targeted three strategic outcomes: infrastructure development through canal improvements, economic outcomes through trading groups and market linkages, and institutional strengthening through enhanced public water management capacity, including formalization of cooperatives and farmer groups. In our study that we are looking here, we examined, sorry, I didn't change the slide before. This is the strategic outcomes I was talking about. And then the two projects that we look at, the project one is the one in Marka district, which we refer to as the southern cluster. In Marka district, intervention rehabilitated more than 140 kilometers of canal, including the primary canal and various secondary and tertiary structures. In Johar district, which is the northern cluster, which is just north of Marka, but not really north in Somalia, interventions rehabilitated more than 220 kilometers of canals comprising again of primary, secondary, and tertiary canals. We will look in detail the amount of primary and secondary and tertiary canal that we looked at. Looking more closely at these clusters, in northern clusters, which corresponds to the Johar district, we highlight 2 agricultural areas that were affected by the canal rehabilitation. Well, in theory, positively affected. We'll see whether they were really. And we refer to them as command areas in the following slides. So these areas, we see the blue lines here are the canals, and this yellow area is the one which was delineated, which was positively affected by this canal intervention, the canal rehabilitation interventions. Similarly, here in the southern cluster, we again look at the same. We have the canals in blue lines, which are the canals which were rehabilitated, and the resulting yellow area, which should be positively affected by these interventions that were made. A quick overview of these studied areas again, and I will pass the mic to Ariel to guide us through how Earth observation was employed to evaluate these interventions. Over to you.
Thanks, Kamran. So as Kamran mentioned, this was a very interesting project in that it took place in a context where rainfall is obviously very sporadic and a major challenge. And so observing the impacts of irrigation was important, not just on average, but during a long enough time series that you could see it under different climatic conditions. It also was a case where this UN program had happened and a round of data collection had been completed in communities that were directly affected and some other nearby communities. Kamran will walk you through a little bit of that data in a minute, but that was kind of the inherent challenge, was looking back at an already completed project and trying to tease out, beyond what you could from a cross-section of households, tease out a time series that was more complete using geospatial data. So combined with what Kamran just showed you, these detailed UN records and maps to identify the specific canals, paths, and timing of improvements, we then overlaid Sentinel-2 imagery over what was at that point a basically 8-year time span. That covered basically 3 years before any interventions happened at the earliest outset for one of the clusters, and then at least 3 years post completion. You can feel free to argue with me about whether these are the right indices to measure water availability and ag production. We used a whole slew of them. I'll try to convince you that it won't matter which one is your favorite when it comes time to the results in just a minute. We also were able to recover from FAO's diligent work in trying to map the existing irrigation infrastructure before any interventions happened, a pretty reliable map of all the existing irrigation that was in place in 2018 in Somalia, so that we could use that to identify potential comparison sites. So just describe for you roughly the treatment locations were 2 big clusters. Interventions happened roughly at a coordinated time period for each of those clusters. That immediately presented us 2 challenges for causal identification. The first is identifying a comparison group. Selecting appropriate comparison sites was not obvious, and in addition, we really only had 2 treatment sites. So that's a pretty small treatment sample and a challenge in identifying comparisons. We naturally thought of synthetic controls, since those methods typically are designed to deal with a small treatment group problem. But most of the existing synthetic control designs use administrative boundaries or some pre-existing defined boundaries to identify units. So what we needed to do was to identify comparison units ourselves. What we essentially did was manually delineated 45 irrigated but non-functional perimeters by using that 2018 map of the existing irrigation, overlaying it with high-resolution imagery from approximately that time period, and delineating the boundaries of those that were non-functional at that point in time as potential comparison sites. So again, that gave us effectively 2 treatment sites and 45 potential comparison sites to use for synthetic control purposes. Here's what that ends up looking like. You can immediately see that the treatment sites are in blue, the comparison sites are in red. The treatment sites typically are larger than the potential comparisons and also at the ends, if you will, of these. Not terrible, not great. We'll try to do some things to adjust for that. The other challenge, again, was that we had initially very carefully delineated every single canal, including not just the primary canals through these command areas, but also secondary and tertiary canals. And some of those were improved at different points in time, again, in the hopes that we would be able to use smaller units for analysis. In the end, once we started analyzing the network paths through which water would flow, we realized that there would be a huge amount of spillover, both conceptually and literal spillover effects within the sample. So we ended up having to use the entire command area as the control. Again, that led us to opt for these synthetic controls as our main mode of causal identification. One of the prerequisites for synthetic controls is that you have a relatively long time series before interventions happen that you can use to match the controls over. Again, synthetic controls partly compensate for having a small treatment group with a longer time series of data that you're using to do the matching. This is, again, a way in which Earth observation was useful here. We had not only 3 to 5 years prior to the interventions, but also the frequency of Sentinel at roughly twice a month in this window gave us multiple looks, not just at an annual level, but also during key parts of the season so that we could do this matching on a more refined basis. Here's NDVI. Again, we had a northern cluster and a southern cluster, and the treatment groups are in the solid lines. Their synthetic controls are in the dashed lines. This is in the run-up to 2018. Sorry, this is treatment happens at the right side of both of these. What you can see is that the resulting synthetic control groups actually match the dynamic time series quite well, right? There's not a big gap between those at any one point for the vegetation indices in the run-up to this point. These are the same, these are the averages immediately around the buffers of the canals. We began by looking at the canals themselves to try to identify whether we could detect water index changes in and around the canals directly. We thought if there's anywhere that this should work, we should be able to see the water where the water was flowing rather than on the nearby fields. Again, this is for the northern cluster. We see very similar patterns in the run-up to treatment, and then very little, if any, detection of meaningful changes after treatment. We found the same thing in the southern cluster as well. So this is telling us like these are fairly reliable comparison groups, and also after the treatment began, we don't see a big divergence in the water index and in the 10 meters immediately around the canals, which immediately gave us pause, because if there's not water that we can detect that's flowing at higher levels in the rehabilitated canals, it's unlikely that that water is going to reach the fields, and we'll see effects in vegetation as well. That gave us pause to say, what's going on? We dug into some high-resolution imagery that was available during the effectively key windows of the season immediately after the rehabilitation occurred. And let me walk you through basically what we see. So This is kind of a zoomed in high-res image of the main junction of the primary canal, thanks immediately closest to the river. So if there's going to be water anywhere, this is where you should see it, and we see some water flowing through the canal. But as you move farther away from that primary junction, we see less and less water in the canals till there's basically no water left in the canal once you get to the main part of the command area. And again, this is immediately post-rehabilitation. And when we looked at environmental conditions during this particular time season, there still was effectively not enough rainfall to feed this complex irrigation system that had occurred. So conceptually, there should be benefits, but environmental conditions are again swamping, in this context, the actual rehabilitated infrastructure. As a result, we see almost no benefits in terms of vegetation indices. This was maybe not surprising, and had we done things in this order, this would have been obvious. But of course, we started with vegetation indices and then worked back to the high-res imagery. I'm just presenting it to you in a more logical order. Maybe that's a lesson for all of us. Almost no changes in any meaningful vegetation indices over this time period for this canal rehabilitation project. Sorry, these are different flavors of vegetation or gaps. We tried Savvy, we tried lots of different things. There were a bunch of other potential confounding factors that we wanted to make sure we weren't missing. First of all, obviously this is, again, a conflict-affected area. We wanted to make sure we accounted for the potential role of nearby conflict in reducing both the effectiveness of the canal management, but then also the knock-on effects. We controlled for proximity to markets, exposure to violence in time-varying ways. Also, this was my first time attempting to use synthetic controls and differences in differences together with this relatively new method. The results are almost identical when we use the synthetic DID as when we use the just straight synthetic control methods. We also thought, okay, what if we zoom in further? So what if we look at subsamples of the command areas that might have, where the irrigation might have been rehabilitated and where there might have been enough water availability? Again, focus on buffers immediately next to the canals, identify a subset of different comparison areas in not treated areas. No matter kind of what flavor of comparison we did, kind of same results held, which then led us to ask, what are the household data reveal that might be related to both the availability of water and broader effects of these programs? So, Kamran, let me let you tell us a little bit.
I'm not going to introduce myself again. Alongside our remote sensing analysis, we drew also on available geo and household data, which was done as a monitoring and evaluation exercise for these projects, to examine how canal rehabilitation and this intervention affected households. So this is also saying what Karen was saying, that remote sensing may not be enough. We should always complement it with household data or vice versa. So using household data, we assess a different set of outcomes. These outcomes are not observable using remote sensing, and they are self-reported measures. So we are also a bit wary of using them causally. So we are really using these results entirely as informational / correlational. So we had 1,145 households across 2 clusters surveyed both before the intervention and after the interventions. In North cluster, the after survey happened in 2023, while for the South cluster, it happened in 2021. Treated plus comparison household identified based on whether they were located inside or just outside the command areas. So quickly having a look here is that the black dots, I don't know if you can see them, they are inside the command areas, while the white dots, which are outside, are control households, while the black dots are the treated households. Looking at we use a simple difference in difference design to look at with location inside and outside the command area as the treatment indicator, and 2 time periods, we see that households that were based inside the command area have higher social cohesion and experience less violence. We also look at some agricultural challenges variable, and households which were inside the command area, they reported less agricultural challenge of lack of water, or reported irrigation from rain-fed only. They reported less depending only on rainwater irrigation. We see this in the North Cluster, however, in the South Cluster, this result does not hold for all the variables. Quickly concluding it, we see that the household level analysis offers a complementary perspective to the geospatial analysis, and we, as everyone has been saying, it should complement. Remote sensing can be complemented by household surveys. Do you want to, Ariel, add something on conclusion? And we are happy to present this work to you. Thank you.
All right. As I mentioned, we've got a few minutes for questions here. I get the great privilege of trialing this question and answer in this room, so bear with us. Can I just get a sense of who has questions? If you can just put your hand up. Okay, that's perfect. I think we have time for these questions. If one comes to mind, I will. Okay, I'm going to call on each person. You don't need to keep your hand up or anything. So we haven't told you this, but you do have access to your mics in front of you. Please, with great power comes great responsibility. Please don't mess with these unless you've been called on for a question. The 4 people that have raised their hands, I think we'll have time for all of you, but I'll kind of point at you. Go ahead and turn on your mic, ask your question, and note who from the presenters it's for. And then for the presenters, if you guys can press and then once you've asked your question, please turn your mic off. The presenters, you can use the mics in front of you to answer your question. Just turn it on, turn it off when you're done, and we'll see how this goes. Cool. So first we'll have this gentleman in the front.
Thank you. My name is Lorenzo De Simone, a technical advisor for Agri-Food Economics and Policy Division in FAO. My question is for Mr. Kunwar regarding the rainwater harvesting in Niger. And I had a question regarding the relationship between NDVI, and I think there was a normalized difference water index or soil moisture. And there was a mention that the latter indicator had a recovery, let's say, performance in the later stage. If you could elaborate a little bit more, because looking at the chart, actually it was drought indicator. I had the impression that this moisture indicator was going down, actually. Now, I don't know if that was actually a drought indicator, so it's decreasing, so it's in the right direction, or it's actually the water content that is going down. And I was wondering if there was a relationship with the increased evapotranspiration from the increased vegetation. Thank you.
So, thanks for the question. And there was one point, I think, there was brief mention that the lower the value, that indicate more the moisture. So after the implementation of Demi-lunes, moisture retention increased, and the play were both together, vegetation recovery as well as moisture. So that was the trend you saw in the second, which is NMDI, drought index. So is that the first part? Okay, yeah.
All right, we had another question over here. Yeah, yes, go ahead.
Gina Maskell. I'm from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. My question's for Arnaud and Jessica. So you showed these plots, or the image of the plots that you're collecting, and we're also running an RCT and collecting plot data in my team right now. And we are struggling with it a lot, and I was wondering how you're collecting the plot data, and if you could share some experiences on how this is going, what the method is, and what the plans are also for the end line. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So we have two data collection settings. We have the social and economic section and the environmental section. So first we did a census, and then from the census we were able to randomly assign some of the farmers to the different treatment group and the control group. And then we run the baseline environmental data collection, which we sent a numerator to the field to measure 3 characteristics, tree cover, canopy, and crowns, all this with measurement tools, and also with an app called Arboreal Tree that automatically use signal to catch up all the 3 characteristics.
I don't think it answered my question. I'm asking specifically about the plot boundaries, which are notoriously very hard to capture.
Yeah, so for the plot boundary, we did that during the census and the baseline social and economic. So farmers, enumerator basically has a GPS with the tablet, and they walk around the plot on the perimeter, on the border of the plot, and the GPS record the different dots of the plot. This is how we're able to have a measurement of the plot size, surface, and perimeters.
Richard, I saw you had a question.
Yeah, again for Kunwar, have you noticed to date any of these Demi-lunes areas that have been abandoned for any reason, maybe perhaps due to conflict? And if so, are you excluding them from your analysis? But I was thinking more generally that it would be interesting to look at the residual effects of these after they have been abandoned. So I don't know if that's happened yet. The other question that came to mind was, could you use this to look at maintenance? And I'm not that familiar with Demi-lunes to know what the maintenance requirements are like on an annual basis, but could we actually detect over time which areas are being properly maintained? I know the government has scaled this project up pretty significantly, and it might be an interesting monitoring tool going forward. Thanks.
Kunwar punts the hard questions to me. The short answer is no. We've not critically looked at maintenance, partly because the way that the treatment is defined right now is as of the construction year or shortly after the initial construction year. So what we're showing you are basically average effects of everything lumped together. I think in a follow-up part, we could certainly look at what's the longevity of the effects over subsamples and connect those to both conflict exposure, but also to kind of dynamic time paths that are specific to maintenance. I think these are typically intended to last for 3 to 5 years with some annual maintenance, but done to them. But yeah, we've not done that yet. It's a good thought.
I passed this question to Ariel because he wanted to ensure that I don't take more commitment on. So.
All right, and I saw we had a question over here.
Okay, thank you. Great set of papers, and I will be very brief. I'm Klaus Deininger from World Bank, because I was going to ask the same question about maintenance and whether you have looked at, and there, of course, in the context of that, if you had thought a little bit about how maintenance incentives also may vary with economic benefits, that because I think you have the data there to actually look at economic benefits and see how that correlates and whether that would be an explanation. Thank you.
Maybe I'll just add that the way that we identified the treated areas was, again, entirely using remote sensing in this context. So we know almost nothing about the specific farm plots incentives directly for that farmer and observe the construction on its own. So in some sense, this is like a really interesting case to which you can recover signals of human behavior, again, with high-res imagery over the specific time windows.
And go over here.
Hello, this is Maya Bott from KfW. I have a question to Arnaud and Jessica on your project. did you gender disaggregate the farmers? Do the female farmers have land rights? And so basically, is there an effect of this? Are there biases or effects to the women, and vice versa? I mean, yeah, so it could also have a positive or negative effect on the female farmers if they have land rights or if they are already by regulation excluded.
Thank you for the question. So we have to adjust to the Niger context. So it's a Muslim country, majority Muslim, and we are surveying farmers in rural area, and land ownership in general is passed from father to son. So we have very few female farmers who own land compared to male farmers. So let me say that the majority of the farmers that we are able to find during our census who own land are male, unfortunately. So we didn't find a large sample of female farmer owning land in our total sample in the area where we were doing our study. So it's the context of the country that it presents itself like that.
Just one question, because it can also have negative effects on formalizing the male ownership of the land. That was my question, because I know the situation in Sudan, which would be quite similar.
Yeah, what we also noticed that female who own land are either through a marriage are widows, or the father doesn't have any sons. So that's something that we will account for during our data analysis.
All right, that's all the time we have for questions, unfortunately, but please feel free to come speak to the presenters after. Just want to thank all of the speakers again. Let's give them one big round of applause.